When I was growing up, I was mostly a perfect angel. And none of my immediate family is here, so you just have to take my word for it. But one thing I did struggle with just a little bit was follow through. My parents would come and ask me to do a chore while I was watching TV. And I would say, sure, absolutely, I love chores. But just please let me finish this one episode of this show. It's probably watching something really fun on Nickelodeon. And back in those days, in the olden days, we had no DVR. There was no way to hit pause. How would I know how the show ended unless I watched the rest of it, right? And my parents would say, all right, angel child, no problem. We trust you. And they'd go away, and they'd come back in 2 hours, and would I have done the thing? Nope. I'd be in the exact same spot right where they had left me, having finished that one show, finished 3 more shows, and started another show. I'm sure there's no kids here today who do that, right? Mm-hmm. So then they took away our cable package, which was very sad. We were stuck with just PBS to distract us. So my parents would come and find me reading a book and say, hey, you haven't finished your chores. Will you do those now, angel child? And I'd say, sure, I love chores. Just let me finish this one chapter. And they'd say, okay. And they'd come back 2 hours later, and would my chores be completed? No, they'd find me right where they had left me, halfway through the book, and even more invested in the story and less willing to move, which I'm sure was very, very frustrating, especially for my dad, who gave up ESPN in the middle of the playoffs to teach us a lesson we had not learned. And I understand that frustration just a little bit myself now that I live by myself. And I look at my sink full of dishes and say, hey, maybe you should wash those. And then I also think, maybe after I finish this show. I'm not alone in that, right? It's frustrating, whether you're waiting on yourself or someone else to finish something. You thought it would be done, and it isn't. It's right where you left it. This feeling of frustration was welling up a little bit for me as I read the lesson from Isaiah. It sounds lovely, right? All these promises from God about how things will be different, how God is creating a new heavens and a new earth where people live happy lives and war is no more. Be glad and rejoice forever in what I'm creating, God says. And I don't want to give God a hard time, especially today on Easter. It's kind of a big day for God, right? But God made those promises like thousands of years ago, and they're still not done. God said, no more shall the sound of weeping be heard or the cry of distress. But living in this world still makes us cry. God said, we will build houses and live in them, but there are still so many without homes or homeland. God said, we will plant fruit and eat it, but so many are hungry. I'm sure I'm not the first person to bring it up, right? God has to be reminded a lot. And sometimes it feels like God hasn't moved. I wonder if Mary felt that kind of frustration on that dark morning. God said Jerusalem would be a delight, but I bet it didn't seem so delightful under the shadow of the crosses. God said the wolf would eat with the lamb and there would be peace, but the Roman wolf had very much destroyed the Jewish lamb. God said people would live to be 100, but Jesus didn't even make it to 35. What has God been waiting for? God promised a new earth, but Mary was still living on the same earth, the earth where the oppressors win and the people you love die. And then we get the first clue that maybe not all is how it seems. Mary goes to the tomb, and the stone is not where they left it. And she runs to the disciples and brings them to investigate. And Jesus is not right where they left him. At first, this is just a sign that the world is worse than she imagined, that someone be so cruel as to steal the body. And then she hears Mary. She hears her name from her beloved teacher, and it is a sign that she is not living in the world that she thought she was living in, a world full of death and sadness. Now she knows that something has been going on behind the scenes while she was sleeping, before she was aware, as tears were dripping down her cheeks. God was doing a new thing, bringing new life where she only saw death. This is the same new thing that God has always been doing. In the beginning, when there was a formless void, God said, "Let there be light." When the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt, God sent signs so they could be liberated. When they were free and Pharaoh changed his mind and came after them, God parted the waters so they could cross over in safety. When people were sent into exile, God brought them back home. When we were trapped by sin, Jesus liberated us on the cross. The forces of death that would like us to think that we live in the same world we've always lived in and that nothing can be done are wrong. God is creating a new heavens and a new earth here among us, even when we don't notice. Every second, babies are being born, addicts are becoming sober, enemies are reconciled, daffodils break through the earth, sins are forgiven, lives are changed. God is not distracted. God is not deterred. God is not waiting for anything. This new thing is happening right now all around us because God is determined that this world will not stay right where God left it. We may not be in the new heavens and the new earth just yet, but we are so much closer. We're getting there, and God is working on it all the time. And God invites us into this work too. Because God is determined that we will not stay where life has left us either. This is the second part of this gospel, isn't it? Jesus greets Mary, lets her embrace him, shows her that the world is no longer what it seems, but that God has done a new thing. And I'm sure she would love to linger there. But what does Jesus say? Don't hold on to me, Mary. Jesus invites her into this new thing that he is doing, and she is transformed from a follower into an evangelist, a proclaimer of good news. So now this woman gets to do a new thing too. She gets to preach. And she goes to the disciples with this good news that God is doing amazing new things, and they are also invited. The whole world is invited. And now the rest of the Bible, the book of Acts, all the letters, is a witness to the fact that they are doing new things too. These fishermen and tax collectors are transformed into apostles and church leaders, and they go into communities all around the world, and they invite them into the new thing. And this is God's invitation to all of us this morning, to be transformed by God's love and to join in that new thing that God is doing within us, among us, around us. And so even though sometimes, every so often, I still leave things undone, looking back over my past, I can tell that I have not stayed where life has left me, that even when I felt like I was stuck or in pain or despair, that was the very moment that God was doing a new thing in me, calling me over and over into this life that God has promised and the life that God has delivered. And God will continue to keep working on me and in this gathering and in our community and in our world until we truly are a new earth. Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia.